am Amy Vetter, and welcome to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. This valuable time is for you to pause in your day and go on your own self-journey. Discover the beliefs that are holding you back from living your best life at work and at home. Learn from the guests on this show as they share their inspirational stories on how they found ways to break internal beliefs that were no longer serving them. Because if you believe you can, you will. And our podcast begins now. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs, where I interview Paul M. Caffrey, who is an international speaker and a seasoned sales expert and co-author of The Work Before the Work, the hidden habits elite sales professionals use to outperform the competition. A pivotal book on sales preparation he co-authored with Phil M. Jones, author of Exactly What to Say. Paul's passion is helping ambitious sales professionals, sales leaders, and founders operate an elite level to drive exceptional sales results. During my interview with Paul, we talked about his journey from being a scientist to a top salesperson, and we learned how to use the scientific process of research for experiments and to be able to solve for the outcomes that we're looking for with our prospects and possible clients to become great and elite in selling so that we're able to not only solve for the outcomes of our clients and our prospects, but also the outcomes that we expect for ourselves as well. This process that Paul is talking about can be utilized in any way that you sell in any type of business, whether you're professional services or a professional salesperson. I look forward to you hearing this interview with Paul. If you like it, please share it with colleagues that it could be helpful to, and also subscribe and like this podcast. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs. My name is Amy Vetter, and I am here with Paul M. Caffrey. And Paul and I have recently met as fellow keynote speakers, and he so impressed me with his knowledge of the sales process and so forth. So before we get started, I'd just love you to just give an intro on what you do and how you help.
Amy, great to be here. Thanks so much for having me on. I help salespeople perform at an elite level. So for me, what's absolutely crucial is getting you to realize what your potential is and helping you go that bit further, that bit faster. And what it all comes down to is preparation. So uncovering the hidden habits elite sales professionals use to outperform the competition is the key. And I'm hoping we're going to get into some of that today.
Yeah, we absolutely will. But before we get there, we always want to know how you got from where you were to here. And so it's good to just start from the beginning of why this has become a passion for you. So where did you grow up, Paul? And what did your mother and father do for a living?
So I grew up in Dublin, Ireland. You can probably tell from the accent, it might sound a little different to some of the others that have been on the show. As a teenager, I was convinced I was going to be a professional footballer and play soccer in England, or football, as we say over here. And that was, I suppose, important to me because it made me quite disciplined. It made me naturally competitive. And what I saw was that those who did well in that were able to show up and do the boring stuff a lot. So if you want to be a top footballer, you have to be quite fit. Getting fit is pretty boring. So I kind of saw that early on, right? There's a little bit of that that is important. My father was a scientist, worked in the lab for many, many years. And then my mother, she had somewhat of an entrepreneurial spirit, did a few different things, but never stuck with the main, never stuck with one. So I was always doing something a little bit different. Now, football career didn't pan out. I got to a stage where I probably wasn't good enough, but I will hide behind the fact of multiple knee injuries definitely stopped me from getting there. So physically not able. And I went into science. So no surprise there. I went into that field initially.
So let's go back to your father a little bit and get into him. So what kind of scientist was your father?
He was a microbiologist slash lab technician.
Okay. So weird. My father is as well, an
Oh,
immunologist.
oh, amazing. I've studied
You don't meet a
immunology. I
lot of
know it so
people
well.
that,
Yeah. Okay, we're going to talk science instead of sales for this
yeah,
podcast. Let's keep going.
trust me, I never went the science route. So, so what did he do with it? Where was he working, and how did you understand what he did growing up?
Did I understand what he did growing up? Not so much. So he worked for a company called Organon, and they were a big multinational, and he was in charge of making sure that the products that they were producing were working. So there was pregnancy testing kits and other diagnostic kits, and he was in charge to make sure that, well, they were actually diagnosing accurately, correctly, and if him and his team they weren't ready to have the mixtures, the batches, the process ready to go, there was a factory of I think a couple hundred people who couldn't work. So it was always crucially important that they got their part right and it was operating, because it would literally shut down production. And then as a kid, getting to see your father going off on an airplane because he has to go to Holland to do something in some factory or something somewhere else was always pretty cool, because then he'd come back with presents and people didn't like presents. So at that point I was exposed to it, and I had a natural curiosity towards science. So in, I suppose, teenage years, that definitely came through.
What was your curiosity? Like what were you interested in about it?
Just in deconstructing how things worked
Hmm.
and looking to understand, well, why things happen. And it was really the why behind it that I thought was super interesting. And in school, you're picking you've got to go through all the different subjects. That was the one that resonated with me. And what I did notice that if you science was very black or white. You could tell if you did a good job or if you did a bad job by the
Hmm.
results of the experiments that you were running. And again, that also appealed to me because a lot of the other subjects were very subjective, particularly English, for example. You think my essay is good or you think it's not. I think it's great. You think it's
Yeah.
not. Okay.
Yes, I love that. So there's a couple things. I mean, because I think one thing you said about your father that I think is interesting, because I had a very different life with my father being an immunologist. He was a professor, and when I went to his lab, it was rats and cockroaches and really smelly stuff.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. No, this was
So
a nice office with lovely
they were
snacks and
doing
comfort.
experiments on really gross things as a little girl.
Yeah.
Um, so, but I love what you said that he kind of took, and he must have said this to you for you to repeat it, that he had a personal purpose behind beyond the science of keeping people employed, that he felt a great responsibility to all of those workers. So, how did he frame that to you, and why was he saying that to you? Can you remember?
Well, if I think about it and unpack it a little bit more, we're talking about, I guess, the 80s
Hmm.
into the 90s. So it's not
Yeah.
today or yesterday. And if the factory got shut down and production was stopped, all those people weren't getting paid.
Hmm.
The factory is closed for a day or a day and a half, something has happened. That's just it's bad luck. It's just the way things have went. So I guess he wouldn't have wanted to see
Hmm.
people being affected by that
Yeah.
due to, I guess, what him and the team were doing.
But I think we all hold that weight in the work we do as like who also benefits from that work and always really expanding out, because I think a lot of times in work we do, we just think about the thing we do instead of the bigger impact
Absolutely. Yeah.
and people that are responsible. So I think that's such an important thing to think about. And in your own work for people listening, to really use that as an example of what is your bigger impact than the output of what you're doing.
Yeah.
Um, and then I think the second thing, when you talk about this not being subjective with science and there being a process, seems very aligned to what you do today. So, was there something in science that clicked? Do you remember a certain experiment or a certain experience where all of a sudden you were like, this makes more sense to me?
Well, I went on and studied science in university and became a qualified microbiologist. And over my
Oh,
four
really?
years doing that, yeah, it was great. And I really enjoyed it. I entered industry in 2008, and that's when I found out it actually wasn't for me. And I'm going to answer your question probably in a way that you wouldn't have expected, because
Hmm.
I remember working for this, global animal feeds company. I was in their
Hmm.
research team, and there was eight of us. We all had our own bench. We all had our own project that we were working on. And I floated the idea that why don't we get together once a month and share what we're doing and how our research is going and the
Hmm.
results that we're getting, and then look to help each other.
Hmm.
I got laughed at. Oh, look at this new kid here. What, like, what? No, nobody wanted to help each other because it was extremely competitive. If you
Mm.
managed to get your research to pay off, you would develop an
Mm.
international reputation, and you're effectively made for life. It was very, very big. Versus
Hmm.
if it didn't work, well, you might get another qualification or you've got an experience. It doesn't mean that your work was bad, and you just continue on. And there was real, I dare I say, jealousy going on
Hmm.
between all the scientists there. And at that point, although I really enjoyed the process, and whether you got the results you were looking for or you didn't necessarily mean you were a good or a bad scientist, because you were trying to prove something that we didn't know the answer to. And the answer could be something groundbreaking or it may not be.
Hmm.
And you weren't guaranteed either way, which was part of
Hmm.
the fun, I suppose. But that then, not knowing where you're going to go and not getting the help of people around you, that got to
Hmm.
me. And that's when I decided to effectively leave the industry.
Wow. So what did you start doing? Like when you were making that decision, what was your process to transition?
My process was I'm going to go into research and look to work on some incurable disease, something
Hmm.
have some bigger impact.
Hmm.
2008, the world economy collapsed. So I
Hmm.
had the option of going to work on to research and figure something out, but for free. And I didn't fancy earning no money in my 20s. So I pivoted to sales, left Ireland, went to the UK, and went to London and started working in a global IT provider at that point, a company called Sun Microsystems. They were acquired by Oracle since. And my approach was, well, science has a process to follow and you can get a result, and it's positive or negative. So I'm going to apply that to sales. How hard can it be? And that
Hmm.
was how I got started.
So how did you even get that job?
I went to I went down to the local town centre of the village that I was living in, just outside London, and had to go to a group interview. And there we are, this fancy tech company. They had 12 of us around the table, and they just put a box of gadgets and gizmos there and said, pick something up and sell it to us. And they were going to hire, I don't, they weren't hiring everybody, but it was one of those things where if you didn't sell whatever that thing was, you weren't going to get the role. I went in, and it sounds really cliche today to say, but I picked a pen because I figured, oh, they're expecting me to pick up the fancy computer or the fancy laptop or the fancy phone. I went with the pen, and that whole old sell the pen to somebody. Now this is 2008, right? So it's
Hmm.
before it's become
Yeah.
such a widespread joke that it is today.
So what did you say? Do you remember? Like what
Yeah.
when you looked at that pen, what how did you make it unique?
Well, I mean, I remember the first thing was the panel interviewers looking on. I don't think that's a thing. I was like, guys, you said anything on the table, it's on the table. And then I just proceeded to question them about,
Hmm.
did they have a need? So do you use a pen in your day to day at the moment? What's it used for? And getting into those outcome based questions, and then just getting to a point of them going, oh yeah, I need a pen because I want to do X, Y, and Z. And well, this pen's available. It's in that budget, but you have to decide to go today. And we all kind of laughed about it, right? And it was again, it was I guess it was my first pitch, right? That's to be
Yeah.
taken into consideration too. But just a few needs-based questions. And I was really glad I didn't pick up any of the technology because people were asking questions on that, and I was sitting there going, I would not have had a clue. I don't know about RAM and processing power. With the pen, I was like, yeah, it writes, it does. That's about it. Okay, I can deal with that.
Well, and I love that too because, you picked something that you truly understood versus trying to show off in another area and to really display your craft. And I think so many times uh we go for that shiny thing instead of the path
Yeah.
of least resistance right in front of it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. I mean, stick to what you know in certain
Yeah.
respects for sure.
Yeah. So once you started in sales, what did you learn?
The first thing I learned was there is no one right way to do it. There is better
Hmm.
ways to do it for sure. And I went, and this was a floor full of 60 people. We were doing outbound. So initially as appointment setting, very, very hard cold calling. I just looked at who are the top performers. I went and sat beside each of them for about 3 or 4 hours for the first week, and everyone else was kind of going, "This is a bit strange. Why is he not on the phone? Why is he over there beside such and such?" And I pulled together what I thought to be the best practice. And the challenge that we had back then, I guess to a large extent it still exists, was you had a limited amount of data. So yeah, there were some people who were doing 300 dials a day, and they were getting the leads, and they were getting the results, but they were quickly heading towards running out of data to contact. So for me, I was more the opposite. I was going, well, how do I stretch that out? So making sure that I was only contacting 50 people per day, but I was getting the same results and getting to be top of the dashboard. So for me, the big takeaway was there is no right or wrong. Well, there's a wrong way, but there are better ways to do it, but you should have a process. And I've taken that with me, ever since. And again, we're talking about quite a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, I think so. I was in sales as well, at a big company, and I had switched. I had been an entrepreneur selling, you know, to build my business. And when I transferred inside sales, when I sold my business, I was kind of baffled by the whole thing of like, what did they do here? And to your point, I I did very, very well. But I didn't follow their process because I didn't, it was exactly what you said, number of calls. And there's statistics behind that, but that's not the way I go about it. And I was doing better, and they couldn't figure out why that was working. And everybody's mind goes in a different direction. And to really be able to capture what works for each person's process is really, really important, and not try to fit everybody into the same process and expect the same results.
Yeah, it's and therein, Amy, lies the challenge because the metrics that we speak about, if you've got 100 people on front of you, well, logically, the more we speak to our customers, the more we've got a chance of getting the result of helping them. And then the
Hmm.
more we follow a process, the better our chances are because we know this process is proven to an extent. But when you go to the individual level, to your point, you had dare I say, a better process than what the company had in place. So you were more successful. And the challenge is for every one Amy, there's probably 10 who would be way, way worse and not get the results. So it really is that's why there's a bit of art and science to sales. It's a combination of the both and of both of them. And how you perform really depends on how you do both. So if you think about the skills that are needed, you can develop your skills to improve how you sell. And for me, preparation is the one skill that is overlooked because
Hmm.
there's no barrier to entry. Anybody can prepare. It's extra work, so a lot of people don't like doing it. Good
Right.
news, people won't do it. Bad news, it's more work. But then you get much more effective and you get much better results. And a great way to consider is what's your win rate?
Hmm.
If your win rate is 5%, it doesn't matter if you're hitting quota, great. If you're hitting quota, great. But if you have a win rate of 5% versus a win rate of 30%, well, the 5% one, that is costing you way more time and probably your company way more money versus if you're at an efficient 30% rate. but it's all levels and it's about, up leveling to get to where you need to go.
But also, I feel those percentages are always hard to look at because if I'm selling a higher ticket item and my 5% win rate is higher than someone at a 30% win rate because they're discounting everything, like that to me is what is
Yeah.
hard about a sales team is they want to be able to go off certain stats, but it isn't all equal, right? Like in the way that you sell. So some people are like one trick ponies, like transactional. And then to your point, if I'm a person that has more and more conversations, but I'm building up a long-term sales process, it's going to look different.
Yeah, and mid-market is a really great place where this shows itself. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
selling to the mid-market, you could run those consultative enterprise style large deals with longer sales cycle to hit your number, or you can do that transactional, lots of different widgets and having high volume. And it kind of falls under either or. So that's a great place to start if you're trying to figure out, well, which one you are. But of course, the key thing is industry stats or the metrics that your company wants you to follow. That's one thing, but you should personally know what your metrics are as well. And as you to your point, Amy, you could if you're working a territory which you've got perfect product market fit for, and there's a lot of companies in that territory that suit what you sell, you could be
Mm-hmm.
much more successful than if you
Right.
just got asked to work in a different town or in a different state, even though everything
Right.
else could be the same. So there are
Right.
so many different parameters.
So how did you apply your science mentality and thinking of this with greater purpose uh, to doing this? Because that's a big difference going from I'm going to research and solve for diseases
Yeah.
to now I'm going to sell IT products. So how did you get your head around that?
So the key piece was I put together a process, which was a number of steps to take. And then in science, a great researcher is always testing things. So
Mm-hmm.
I ran the experiment this way. Next time I'm going to run it and change one of the parameters itself. I look to do that in sales. So should I follow up 3 times? Should I follow up 6 times? Should I mix in phone calls? So I try a different platform, and if I'm pitching it, should I look to pitch it this way? On top of that, then while looking to go in science, I'd be looking at the literature. So what has changed? What new techniques are coming out that I could be considering? And in sales, I'm looking at, well, what skills do I have? What skills am I good at? What are people saying that I should look to develop? So back then, NLP was quite a big thing. So then looking into NLP and understanding that yes, people will interact with you in different ways. Some people like to hear something, others like to see it. Some want to get their hands on it and start demoing, then figuring out by the language that they use early in the conversation which bucket they fall into, and then developing the skill set to be able to adapt my pitch, whether it's in a meeting or in a longer engagement, to meet that person where they are. And sometimes you realize quickly that, oh, there's a lot of different types of people here. Now, this is getting a
Mm-hmm.
little bit advanced, but again, that's the piece of you're never finished improving and then looking to always see how you can get better. And that was a big thing I took from science into sales.
Yeah. Well, and I also love because I mean, I think, being part of many sales teams, they want a prescription way to sell. And I love what you're saying is assess the client, the prospect of the way that they learn or the way that they communicate, and then have a different sales process depending on how the client's going to take in information or
Yeah,
prospect.
and the key thing is we have a process to follow because that gives us the most likelihood of success. But if we establish that this person does not want to see the proof of a demo, that's
Right.
not so important to them, it is something else. Well, then let's not demo, but be able to call out to leadership, we're purposely not doing a demo because of X, Y, and Z, and it will improve our chances of getting this across the line versus, no, I'm going to make them just follow our process and I'm going to make them sit through the demo, even though it's a waste of their time and it's not going to be useful. Hard to do because
Mhm.
it's going to put you in a situation where you need to justify what you're doing. But ultimately, the more experience you build up, the more time you're there, you'll realize I don't want to lose this just because I'm following something that maybe isn't going to help me get there. And a second part to what you mentioned earlier, and kind of comes along, is always looking at the outcome that people are getting. So when I
Yeah.
was working in the UK, I'm selling Microsoft technology. It's Microsoft Cloud. And again, everyone's afraid of the cloud back then. But the key thing for me was if I sold to a company with 200 or 500 people, it meant that their team, their employees had the option to work from home. A
Hmm.
long time ago, that was quite a big deal. And
Right.
again, connecting to that, although maybe isn't the driver behind the company going ahead for it, but from a personal perspective, I did have that piece of, yeah, I'm delivering value, which has been proven, but also to end users, I'm giving them a new way to work. And that was something which I always appreciated and liked, particularly back then.
Yeah. Well, and I think really that's a lot of times where you begin in the sales process, understanding their pain points. Why are you talking in the first place? What is the outcomes that they're looking for? And designing your conversation to align with that. Because I think a lot of
Yeah.
people do make the mistake of, I'm just going to tell you what I do, see if you like it,
Yeah.
and buy it versus listening and then massaging what you say to align to the pain points.
Yeah, it's one of these things where you need to put the other person first. So, one of the things I speak about in the book is, what is the other person looking to achieve and how are they going to achieve that? And depending on how big or small an opportunity is, going into that a bit deeper or just staying at that surface level. But even if you bring that into all of your conversations, even the unexpected conversations, then you end up in a position where you've got an idea of how you could serve this person. And if you ask yourself the same questions, well, what am I looking to achieve? How am I going to achieve that? So, for example, I'm at a conference tomorrow. I'll be speaking and I'm looking forward to meeting a lot of people. And would I like to bring on a couple of new clients? Yeah, absolutely. I certainly would. So, will I be letting people know that I speak at keynotes and I do kickoffs? For sure. I'm not expecting the people I mentioned it to actually be the people who will turn around and go, yeah, come on in and do it and do this for our company. But if I've served them in that conversation and helped them get value from the day, and they get an opportunity to chat with somebody and that topic comes up, there's a much higher chance of them actually recommending me versus not if I haven't had that value-driven conversation for them. And this is what a lot of elite people do across the board, particularly from a networking standpoint. It's so, so powerful because they're always connecting, and that means they get connected.
Yeah. Well, and I'm hearing a theme over and over again is this practice and being prepared. You did it as a football player, you did it as a scientist, you're doing it as a salesperson. So, what was the path to you moving from selling to what you do now?
So I went through a period of real success, and it was a lot of work. It was really long hours. It was jumping on an airplane at 5 in the morning in a rental car, doing a lot of meetings, and then 12 o'clock at night, sometimes actually sitting in a hotel bar, having a drink and doing quotes and sending it off, and then getting ready to go again the next day. And I
Mhm.
focused on how I can improve, and performance was key. I came across Todd Herman. I think you may have you may know Todd. He's big in the performance space. He wrote the book The Alter Ego Effect, and I was fortunate enough to get some coaching in one of his online programs literally 10 years ago now, so quite a while ago. And that's where it drew into elite high performance. And from that point, I ended up coaching not only the CEOs and the founders that I was providing solutions to, but also a lot of peers as well and a lot of leaders in the space. And then I realized, a lot of people need help with this to reach their potential. So I decided to take the step away from industry and then look to share these skills with others so they can go on and thrive.
That's awesome. So, when you talk to organizations or leaders, what do you think is the number one thing you hear over and over again of where people are going wrong or what they're struggling with the most?
Well, the first thing is they don't have a preparation plan or routine, or sometimes even a checklist they may expect their whole organization to run a demo and to run a discovery process, but they haven't provided even a single checklist of what do I need to do to prepare for this to
Mhm.
reach to make it successful. And then the outcome as well is never as clear as it should be. So, what makes this a successful discovery call? I mean, great if they buy, super, but that's not really what we're trying to do. We're trying to help people make a confident yes, no decision. And they are the two things which I just see a lot of ambiguity around. And there's a focus on the metrics, as you've called out earlier,
Mhm.
or something has happened recently, and they think that's the big thing that needs to be solved. But really, it's a step back and building in a preparation framework and being clear on the outcome and sharing that with your customers.
So, what would you suggest as a way to evaluate a sales organization?
So the first thing I'd look at is, have you got a process at the moment? I'm hoping that you do. So see what that process is, and is
And
that
how would you
aligned?
define a process? Because I think a lot of people would say they have it, but maybe it's not in the way that you think of it.
So a process is there are a certain number of steps that we expect to bring a customer on to make a confident yes, no decision. Those steps are captured, let's say, in a CRM. It's essential.
Hmm.
And that is one part of it. Then looking at, well, where do people fall off? Where do people get stuck and spend a huge amount of time in the process? Sometimes step two or step three after we qualify them, they get stuck for a really long period of time. Then we're looking at that going, okay, well, there's something gone wrong here. Should this person have made it to the next step? Or is it that that meeting wasn't effective and didn't actually meet the outcome that was needed? So we didn't sell the next step to the prospect. They didn't see the value in doing it so soon. We didn't sell the value of what we're doing, perhaps. And why did we not get that? Well, we didn't know the outcome we were trying to go towards, and we didn't spend a little bit of time preparing. So we've missed something. And they're really the fundamentals that I'd be looking at helping with in the work when we're looking to get started.
Yeah. Well, and really, this is very similar to doing a science experiment, right? Like you're trying to get to a result, and then you've got testing different processes to get there. So, when you decided to go out and speak, you also wrote a book and you've collaborated with a number of people. How did that come to be?
So I remember being at a number of conferences, and I would have went to a lot of conferences, and I realized this is a great way to spread a message. This is a great way to help a lot of people at once. And then I realized, well, a lot of these people have books. And I looked a bit more, and pretty much everyone had organized their thoughts in a book or in something quite similar. So I realized, well, if I want to go and help as many people as I can, I need to do that. And coincidentally, as I was working in Salesforce at this point and running some events. Phil Jones, who co-authored the book with me, he's best-selling author of Exactly What to Say. Check out his stuff; it's absolutely brilliant. Obviously, Amy, you know him well. We met up with him in New York that time. I brought him in to do some events with customers, and we had some side conversations. I let him know that I was doing this book and it was based on preparation and this was what was happening. And because we'd done a few events together, then we decided to actually release the book together. So it's how Phil got involved. Again, it's about sharing and looking to speak with others. It is a really, really key thing. And yeah, serendipitous really, because it was never planned for me to co-author.
Mhm.
I always planned to do it on my own.
Yep. So I've got a question for you, just thinking about a lot of salespeople I've known over time and in organizations, that when you're talking about practicing and doing a process, the personality type of a salesperson isn't always to do that. Like to take that time to do that research. They just want to like move on to the next sale. Many that I've worked with, not all. So how do you break through where this doesn't seem so daunting to someone where this doesn't come naturally to them?
And also to add to that point, you get people who have, I've done this 100 times. I don't need to practice.
Yeah,
I can do it.
exactly.
And
Yes.
the reality is you can. You can have a good sales meeting, you can do a good demo without putting in that preparation up front. But if you want to go from being good to being elite, that is the difference. If you
Hmm.
look at anybody who's elite in any field, they put in a huge amount of work that is unseen. And I've seen sales professionals who've got 15 years experience, who know the product that they're selling inside out, are really, really exceptional operators who will have a team of people with them when they're delivering a demo. Insist on practicing that 4 or 5 times, having the wider team driven demented because they don't want to go through another dry run because, again, they're all very experienced as well. But what happens is there's little moments that will come along in your sales meeting. And if you've done the work before the work, you'll be in a position to, number one, spot them because you're not going to be worried about what you're saying or what's coming next because all that's going to be natural. And then number two, you're going to be of your best possible opportunity of being able to confront that and get past it, as opposed to just relying on what you make up on the spot, if you even notice it at all. And that is the key difference. And the really, really top salespeople will work a lot fewer deals, but their deal values will be much, much higher, and their success rate will be much, much higher. So ultimately, volume will only take you so far. And if you're tired of doing way, way, way too much, that's where you make the switch to being more prepared.
So what percentage of time do you think, like in a normal work week, should be spent doing preparation?
So there is two aspects to this.
Okay.
One is, what is the outcome going to mean for you and your year? Not your day, your year. So if you work in enterprise sales, you might only sell to 2 or 4 customers throughout the whole year. So it
Right.
makes sense to spend a week, maybe even 2 weeks preparing for some of those meetings and getting everything bang on because you will not have many chances. If you work in SMB and you are selling something every day, you're going to have a lot more opportunities to sell. So the amount of preparation you want to put in there should be a lot less. So you factor that in. And a good rule of thumb is, if it's an hour long meeting, putting aside 10 to 15 minutes to prepare for that. If it's a half-hour meeting, maybe 5 to 10 minutes. And you can even do this for internal meetings as well. And what does it mean? Well, it means the meeting will probably be shorter for internal meetings because you'll be able to get to what's important. And sometimes you can send an email and circumvent that. But I'm going off point because that's internal meetings are generally away from sales. And that really is the key piece. And even if you just prepare for 5 minutes before you go into a meeting and you're able to, have researched the customer pain points that have you speak, and you're able to call out something about them that they didn't expect you to know, you can get that meeting started in a really positive, interesting way. That means the rest of your meeting can be exactly the same. The content will be exactly the same, but the only difference is you've now framed it as somebody who has done the work, who's really interested, who wants to get their business and wants to deliver them that outcome. And that makes the difference versus just showing up on, hey, how's it going? I'm going to ask you questions that I could have Googled but didn't bother. So I don't really respect your time. And yeah, let's get through this.
Well, and also just getting present, for that experience, I think is important because we have so many things that are on our plate all day long. And so making sure that each instance people know you showed up to be there with them is so critical, I think, in sales. So many great tips that you've said. I could talk to you all day about this stuff. But I'd like to end today with some rapid fire questions. So you get to pick a category. So either family and friends, money, spiritual, or health.
Let's go health.
Okay. So things or actions I don't have that I want with my health.
More consistency.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is I do personal training class twice a week,
Mm-hmm.
and I would like to do it maybe 3 or 4 times a week, and that's something that I'm working up to. But what I've noted before is when I go if I go in for 4 sessions straight away, I start missing them. So I'm now
Yes. And
building
then
up
getting
to that.
disappointed. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. And
Yeah,
it's annoying when you've taken this because it's a small group, right? If I book in a spot, someone else is missing out.
right.
And I don't like booking something and then maybe not fulfilling that obligation.
Yeah. So things are actions I do have that I want to keep.
So being mindful of what I'm actually doing when it comes to my health. That is something which is pretty key. And I suppose as we all get a bit older, you can feel when you have eaten poorly or you've made some bad decisions and you get a bit
Hmm.
sore as a result of it. But now, thankfully, I'm in a position where I'm able to make choices that prevent that to a certain extent. So a few years ago, I gave up alcohol altogether. I remember I was with my friends and we'd been to a football game and then afterwards I don't like this anymore. It doesn't make me feel good. And it sounds
Yeah.
funny to say everyone really laughed about it. I haven't I haven't had any since. And being an Irish person, particularly
Yeah, that's a
internationally,
huge
and
deal.
then not drinking, it can be, say conversation starter, that can be a conversation killer, but it doesn't make me feel as good as it used to. And
Hmm.
particularly hangovers, all that stuff. I now don't even need to worry or think about that.
Yeah, yeah. What the outcome is what you're focused on.
Exactly.
Um, things are actions I don't have that I don't want.
I don't want to be going elite when it comes to health.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is when COVID hit, gyms closed for about 12 to 18 months in Ireland. We had quite a severe lockdown. It
Yeah.
was pretty crazy. So I
Hmm.
started running. And I got to the point of being able to do, 20 plus miles and enjoying it, but being gone for 2 or 3 hours at a time, 4 hours at a time. And I don't want to get to that point of being elite in a sport or in a fitness endeavor that takes me away from other things such as
Yeah.
family and then work and that. So
Yeah.
but I'd really like to. So there you
Yeah.
go. So
Well, it's because is it an obsession or health? And I think that, it is
yeah,
important because you want to make sure your family and things that you enjoy are balanced with it. All right, last one. Things are actions that I do have that I don't want.
actions that I do have that I don't want. I would like to push myself. I think I'm quite resilient, and from a health perspective, I can jump all in, and I would wish I
Hmm.
wasn't like that. So, for example, I'll get very regimented and like, right, 160 grams of protein. I'm having ice baths. I'm focused on recovery, and it's 100 miles an hour for say 3 or 6 months, and then next day I just stop and it's gone.
Uh-huh.
And I would like not to have that because when I switch into that mode, I really just want to keep going and being able to switch in and out of it, I think would be better.
Yes.
But it's not there, which again probably leans back to my previous answer of why I don't want to get into a new sport.
Yeah, exactly. So with everything we talked about today, there's so many takeaways for people, but is there anything you want to emphasize or that we missed that you just want to bring up to the audience before we close out today?
Even just a little preparation can take you way further than you would have expected.
Hmm.
If you're working in sales, if you're doing anything else, take the time and just be ready and watch what happens to those opportunities. Watch what happens to the work you do. It's going to take you way, way further. And for me, that would be the one message I'd implore people to build into their life.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining us from the UK and this being the end of your day. I appreciate it. And I'm sure our listeners are going to be so happy they listened to this as well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to call out. I'm in Ireland. We're not UK.
Oh,
Ah,
sorry. I thought
it's
you said you
okay.
moved to the UK. I
Yeah,
got
yeah,
that
no, I've
wrong.
moved back. So I
Yeah.
know I
You moved
was
back.
in London and Manchester. We're back now. Yeah, time to go get the kids.
Yeah,
Thanks so much for having me
okay.
on, Amy. Really appreciate connecting again and look forward to the next time we speak.
Thank you. Me too. And now for my mindful moments with this interview with Paul M. Caffrey. And it was so interesting to hear about his background with his father being a scientist, a microbiologist. And really that first stopping point for me was that his father really saw beyond the work that he was doing into another purpose of making sure that people's jobs and occupations were protected by the work that he did. Sometimes we can feel like our work might be monotonous or that we don't really think we're contributing until we start looking outside of ourselves and what is the greater good that we are providing. And I think it's important that in your mindful moment after listening to this episode, that you think about what are the things that you impact, whether that be your family, whether that be others, whether that be a greater purpose in the work that you do and the effect that you have on others. It can be small, it can be large, but I think it's important we ground ourselves in that we can feel satisfied with the work that we're doing each day. Then we talked about how Paul went into this field as well, that after seeing the example of his father and also loving science as well, going through school and realizing that science was very objective as far as whether something worked or didn't work. It wasn't something subjective of someone's opinion of whether they like it or not. And that he really appreciated from doing it. But the one thing that he found, and I think we can find this in any profession, and I think it's really important that we note it, that one thing he was finding as a scientist is that it was very competitive and there wasn't collaboration. Instead, there was jealousy amongst scientists and not sharing what they were doing because everyone's trying to get to the finish line faster. Now, when we kind of expand that conversation to the greater good is collaboration and what each person is learning so that we can solve the outcome that we're trying to solve. And then how do we share in that? I think it's really important that whatever we do, we realize that we can multiply by working together as a team than trying to think that we can always do it ourselves or alone. And that happens in the sales process as well, whether we are a professional salesperson or we are selling for our firm or an organization, that sometimes we get so focused on our own outcome that we don't think about that if we brought in collaboration or other expertise, how much better we could solve the outcome or the pain point that someone is explaining to us. It is important to not try to do everything alone and to look to the outside of who can help and who can collaborate, that you can create the best outcome for the person that you're solving for, but also for yourself and your organization as well. The one thing that he has noticed with sales is there is no one way to do it. And I think in my experience, this is where we can have a framework of how we go about a sales process. But when we try to prescribe that there are certain things to say or certain things to do, that's where some people thrive and some people don't thrive, because depending on our style, depending on what the outcome is that we are trying to create, it's important we don't box people into a script. If people need a script, and that is how they best work, we should have a script ready for people. But for people that like to have some flexibility and be able to bring in their own personality, that they can get the best outcome for themselves, a framework is really important. And I think that is mostly what we talked about from this interview, is what does that framework look like and how do we test these frameworks and these processes to get the best result? And that part is testing every stage of that sales process and see what is working or not working with different clients. And not all clients are going to be the same. What is that client's personality type? And I think also that was a great point that Paul made was, does the client want to hear it? Do they want to see it? Do they want to touch it, demo it? Whatever that is, in order for them to get comfortable in the purchasing process. Listen to your prospect and your clients, if you are in an ongoing sale, of how they best like to make a decision. Too many times we force things. I remember a few years ago, I was trying to build a sunroom. I knew exactly what I wanted. I was very clear about what I wanted. And I would tell the salespeople, don't go through your whole sales pitch. There are specific things I want to do. And the ones that would still go through everything and bore me, things I didn't want to know, nor did I care about. If I want to go look it up, you can give me the reference of where it's at. But I wanted to specifically get, if they wasted my time, I cut it out because I couldn't be sure that what I was going to get when I bought this is what I needed because they weren't listening. They were following their own process and they weren't listening to what I needed, how I wanted to make my purchasing decision. And I think it's really important when we think about ourselves as salespeople that we are allowing that space for someone to tell you what is it exactly that they need, how do they want to receive it, how do they want to hear it, so that we can have a greater success rate and we can help more people. And really, really important is practice. And a lot of people don't want to hear this because, like Paul said, so many people feel I got this, I know how to sell, or I know how to do this. And this can really be anything that you do in business. We are always continuous learners. I, every year, am taking some course, some class, some conference to keep expanding my knowledge in the field that I am in, that I don't get stale. There's always something that I can pull away and maybe update in my current process. Don't close yourself off from the learning process and don't close yourself off from practicing and preparation. It's because if we do those things, we are actually caring how someone else feels in that process, that we are creating the best experience possible for a potential prospect or a client, that they want to work with us. And then it is really important that we look at what the other person is looking to achieve, not just what we are trying to achieve. In order to be elite, as Paul puts it, it takes work, it takes practice. The best elite athletes practice the drills every single day, the boring stuff. When I was in a symphony and you're practicing in rehearsal, you're practicing one measure over and over and over again. You never hear that in the concert. You hear this beautiful piece of music, but not the practice that went into it. But in order to get that outcome, it takes that constant performance of the boring stuff as well to continuously get better and not forget about the basics. One of the things that I think was a great way to leave it, as Paul said, was even just a little preparation can take you further than you expected. If you can even add in 10 or 15 minutes before your meetings, before running right into a sales call or a meeting, just to get present and just to really make sure that you're grounded in what they need, it can make a world of difference. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Paul's got the book, The Work, that you can go and purchase. We'll have that in the show notes for you. I think it is so important that if this really resonated with you, that learning the process outside your profession can help you inside your profession as well. If you like this episode, please share it with the people around you. We so appreciate the comments, the feedback, those of you that even let me know how much an episode has meant to you or what you've learned or how it's impacted your life. So appreciate your support so that we can continue to do this every single year. Thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. I hope you will take a moment to pause before entering back into your day to reflect on this podcast and note 1 to 2 actions you are inspired to do from today's conversation that you could incorporate into your life. To read the full blog and listen back to this episode or any other, you can find them at www.amyvetter.com/Breaking Beliefs podcast and related videos on my YouTube channel. For daily inspiration, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Amy Vetter CPA. I hope that you will choose to like this and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and more. so that you can join us for more inspiration on our next episode.